Matthew 5:38 through 42. The NIV calls it an eye for an eye. The ESV calls it retaliation. It says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." I think first we have to address the elephant in the room, which is this verse, the first verse, about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. There is so much out there on this verse, and it made doing research, this Bible study, a lot harder because of that. I think people get hung up on this verse, and they're completely missing the point of the whole thing, what Jesus was trying to say, or at least one of the things Jesus was trying to say. A lot of people think this verse is saying that they can do to others what was done to them. But actually, this verse is regarding the court system, and it was a restriction on punishment, that an eye for an eye was the maximum punishment. Then Jesus says, "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Now, one of the things people get caught up on in this verse is the word slap. And they debate if it's a slap or a hit. But if you study the Hebrew, you can see here that slap is different from the word beat or to hit. The other thing that people get hung up on in this verse is turning the other cheek. And when I first read this, I thought, wow, we can't even defend ourselves. We should always be peaceful like Jesus was. When he was arrested in the garden, Peter cut off the guard's ear, and Jesus told him to put that back in its place. And I thought that we should never be violent at all. But then God spoke to me, and he said that what would be more evil, to stand and watch something terrible happen to somebody, like your family, your kids, or to protect them from that evil thing that is happening or going to happen. And the same thing applies to your own life also. You can defend yourself when you're in a life-threatening situation. So what we should do is find peace at all costs. Here are 6 verses where Jesus was going to be killed, and he avoided the situation completely. Matthew 10:23 says, "But whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next." But since we are talking about a slap or an insult, we should turn the other cheek, and that is what Jesus says. We should not retaliate. 1 Peter 3:9 says, "Not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing." 1 Thessalonians 5:15 says, "See that no one repays another with evil for evil, but always seek after that which is good for one another and for all people." Romans 12:17 says, "Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men." Proverbs 24:29 says, "Do not say, 'Thus I shall do to him as he has done to me. I will render to the man according to his work.'" Proverbs 20:22 says, "Do not say, 'I will repay evil.' Wait for the Lord, and he will save you." Leviticus 19:18 says, "You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." And Romans 12:19 says, "Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.'" So to recap, in verse 38, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, we have a restriction of punishment, so that there isn't an unjust punishment for any criminal act. Then in 39, we have Jesus saying to turn the other cheek, which is about a slap or an insult and how we should not retaliate. In verse 40, it talks about a lawsuit. In 41, it talks about going an extra mile with someone. And in 42, it talks about giving to people who beg for you. So why are all these verses grouped together? We started off with an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which was a restriction on punishment. And then we end with giving to people who beg. Those two things really don't have much in common, but they do. You have to ask yourself, why are these verses grouped together when each one is different from the other? What do they have in common? These verses actually describe the death of Jesus, his crucifixion, from his arrest to his last breath on the cross. And it's even in the order that it happens. But these verses are also about sacrifice and giving, which are the same thing. And that is why these verses are grouped together. In Matthew, we have first the slap and turn the other cheek. And in John 18:22, we see Jesus being questioned by the high priest. Jesus answers the high priest's question, and a soldier who's standing by slaps Jesus because he didn't like his answer. The next verse in Matthew talks about the lawsuit, and in John 18:29, there is an accusation brought against Jesus. Matthew 5:41 talks about going the extra mile, and in the first century, a Roman soldier could requisite you to carry his things for 1 mile, and Jesus is telling you to go the second mile or go further. And in John 19:17, we see Jesus carrying his cross by himself as far as he could. And then finally, Matthew 5:42, it talks about giving to those who beg. And in John 19:30, Jesus says his last words, which are, "It is finished." This is a gift, the gift of life that Jesus has given to us. And we were all beggars. The Jews were beggars. Every time they made an animal sacrifice, it was a beg. They were begging for life. So to sum it up, when we turn the other cheek, we are giving grace. We should be willing to give up anything to follow Jesus, including our possessions. We should give our time and our energy to people. And we should give financially. Also notice that we have all three socio-economic classes pictured here. The slap, when Jesus was being questioned, was from a Roman soldier, which would be considered an upper class citizen. Matthew 5:40 talks about the lawsuit. Someone tries to sue you. That would be someone equal to you, to your class in court. And then we have someone who would be considered lower class, begging for money. And I think these verses tell us that the socioeconomic class doesn't matter. We need to give and sacrifice accordingly no matter who it is. When Jesus sacrificed himself, when he gave to us the gift of life, he didn't give it to one specific group. He gave it to anyone that would come to him, that would accept his name. So that wraps it up for this Bible study. I really learned a lot. It took me about a month to get through this one. And I've started to notice that there's always seems like there's two sides to every single verse in the Bible. There's a factual meaning to the verse, as in an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth was about the restriction of law, but there's also a spiritual meaning to every verse. And a lot of the time, the Sermon on the Mount, it was about the condition of your heart.